Good evening. I'm Master Gardener Jane Bellinger, and this evening we're going to talk about creating mini gardens. First, I'd like to talk about the type of container you might like to use. Everyone has their own preference. This one is a recycled colander. This one is just a small agate bowl. This one is plastic that someone has nicely drilled holes in for us. This one is a new one that you could purchase at your garden center. And this one is just a recycled pot. Our first step is to create soil and drainage for our plants. Now in a colander like this, in order to keep the soil contained, we line it with a coffee filter. And then to create our drainage, we're going to put a little perlite in the bottom. And then we're going to add our soil. Now I moistened this soil so that it wouldn't be quite so light and fly around on us. This is Soilless mix. You can buy it at any garden center or greenhouse. And this is just Soilless mix. In this particular mix, it doesn't have the fertilizer or the soil moist mixed with it. In the case of this nice pot with just the single hole, I would still want to put a filter. Sometimes you put the filter between the drainage mixture and the soil to keep so much soil from washing down into your drainage mixture. Now in this case, I'm going to recycle some of my stones to create another layer on top of here. So we got a little bit of perlite and a little bit of stones and a couple weeds. Our next part is going to be selecting plants. Now I grow my plants in a series of pots that I have around my yard so that when I want to do a planter, I can just divide the plants that I already have started. And you can just take them out and your plant is all rooted, ready for you to use in your next project. So I like to have a combination of plants that will be complementary to each other, give you contrast in foliage, in height, but be compatible in colors. Now we don't want to have everything at one level, so we're going to use some rocks or some pieces of wood to create dimension in our design. So I'm going to start, eventually we want to make sure that our coffee filter is completely covered with soil. We're going to start with this sedum that is trailing down. We got to get the roots well down in the soil. Now we will be using some mosses and some rocks as our top dressing materials to keep the soil moist, and cut down on our weeds and add a point of contrast. Next, I'm going to plant this little begonia. I don't want to get it down too low because we're going to be filling in with more soil and moss. So we want it to be growing at the right height. I'm going to tuck the rock in here in the middle. Next, we'll add some moss and maybe a little log or a piece of bark, whichever might look complementary. No, I think a piece of bark. I usually try to cover the whole surface with something. Now, our moss. I have another spot where I am able to grow moss quite nicely. I usually try to pull the weeds out so that they won't transplant, but you can just work the moss apart. Of course, you don't want to use a moss next to a creeping plant because it won't have the contrast that you want. But you can work it in nicely, like on this begonia. It'll work in nicely. Then we're going to put a little water because we're a little dry. I'm using the water to help settle the roots and the soil, so when we put other types of material, they won't sink out of sight. Put a little moss over here. This is growing moss. It's all live. It will continue to grow and stay nice and green. Cuts down on your evaporation. We can use some smaller stones for complementary color. Oops. Going to take some little bit different color and add it for a little more contrast. Makes the other stones stand out. And we have some finer ones yet. And they fit in the spaces in between. The lighter color of the stone makes the other things pop because of the contrast in color.